All right, let's jump into something pretty fascinating today, something I think we've all thought about a lot. Love.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You sent in this article from TATANKA called What is Love? And really digs into some cool, kind of unconventional ideas
Mm-hmm.
about love and, what the opposite of love really is.
Right.
And the interesting thing is, this article is actually talking about a podcast episode that the author listened to.
Okay.
So we're sort of doing a deep dive into their deep dive.
Deep dive squared. I like it.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
we're going to kind of break down those ideas from the podcast together and maybe even, question some of the things that we thought we knew about love
Yeah. Yeah.
along the way.
Um, right off the bat, this podcast kind of throws a curveball.
Oh,
They define love as unity,
okay.
the act of bringing something into yourself and creating the sense of oneness.
Uh-huh.
And they're very clear. It's not just about romantic love.
Oh.
It's a much broader sort of energetic connection.
Mhm.
Like imagine feeling so connected to a friend that their happiness just feels like your own
Mm,
and their sadness like really affects you deeply.
yeah.
That's kind of what they're getting at with this love as unity.
Okay, so I can see where they're going with that.
Yeah.
But then they say the opposite of love isn't hate, it's fear,
Right.
which I think is really interesting.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
They say fear is the force that kind of pushes things away from us and creates that feeling of separation.
So it's like,
So love pulls us together.
Yeah.
Fear pushes us apart.
got it. So this constant
This push and pull.
back and forth.
Yeah, between those two forces.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Does this idea of, love as unity and fear as separation, does that resonate with you at all?
It does, actually.
Yeah.
When you think about how we react when we're afraid,
Right.
we tend to isolate ourselves, build walls, push
Right.
people away.
Exactly.
And then on the flip side, when we feel love, we kind of open ourselves up to that connection and intimacy.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah.
And then this podcast, they go even further and they say that this feeling of separation, it's actually an illusion.
Okay.
They propose that, at the most fundamental level, everything is connected,
Whoa.
part of a single consciousness.
Now that's where it starts to get really interesting for me.
Yeah.
I've heard this idea before, this idea of oneness.
Right.
But if we're all ultimately connected, why do we experience so much separation and division?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is that it's our ego, our sense of individual self,
Okay.
that creates this illusion of separation.
So we're all wearing these special glasses
Mm-hmm.
that make us see ourselves as separate,
Yeah.
when in reality, we're all part of this one big thing.
It's like we're all on the same team,
Right, exactly.
but we've forgotten.
But our egos are tricking us into thinking that we're not.
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's true,
Nope.
then what causes all the pain and suffering?
Well, they say this podcast, they say that illusion of separation, that is the root cause of all suffering.
Interesting.
When you think about it,
Yeah.
so much of our pain comes from feeling isolated, alone, different, rejected. So if we cling to this idea of separateness, it can lead to loneliness, anger, resentment, even violence.
It's like we're constantly at war
Hmm?
with ourselves and each other because we've forgotten that we're all part of the same team.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Right.
But here's the hopeful part.
Okay.
They offer a solution.
All right.
They call it radical self-love.
Okay, I've heard that term before.
Yeah,
And to be honest, it always sounded a little fluffy to me.
I get that.
So what does it actually mean in this context?
It's not just bubble baths and self-care Sundays. Those can be nice too.
Sure.
But in this context, radical self-love means embracing every part of ourselves,
Okay.
even the parts that we might normally reject or judge.
So it's about accepting our flaws and imperfections.
Yes. Even the parts we might not be proud of.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that even those quote-unquote negative parts
Mm-hmm.
are still a part of the whole.
Okay.
And by integrating them with compassion,
Yeah.
we can begin to create a sense of internal unity.
So we kind of have to accept all those shadow sides.
Yeah, the less desirable aspects of ourselves,
Right.
make them part of the whole.
And then that helps us to connect with others more authentically.
That's the idea.
Interesting.
They suggest that by fostering that internal unity,
Yeah,
we naturally extend that love and connection outwards to the world around us.
I like that.
The more whole and complete we feel within ourselves, the more we can offer that same wholeness to others.
Makes sense.
Right.
The article also talks about forgiveness as being a really vital role in experiencing love and overcoming that feeling of separation.
It does, and it highlights a really powerful quote from the podcast. In a state of unforgiveness, you don't offer the truth of yourself to others. Instead, you carry the energies of past pain, blocking the divine connection.
You really have to see unforgiveness not just as holding on to anger or resentment. It's how those feelings create a barrier between you and other people.
It's like carrying around a heavy weight that prevents us from really fully connecting.
I like that analogy. It's a good one.
And forgiveness in this context is about releasing that weight and creating space for love to flourish.
So it's not about condoning the actions that cause the hurt.
Exactly.
It's about freeing yourself from the burden of that pain.
You got it.
Okay. It's about understanding that forgiveness is ultimately a gift that we give ourselves.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Love as unity, fear as separation, this illusion of separateness.
Yeah.
Radical self-love and forgiveness as like a key to connection.
Definitely.
What other practical advice did the podcast have for actually bringing more love into our lives?
Well, they emphasize the importance of something they call practicing oneness.
Okay.
As a way to shift our perspective and see the world differently.
What does that look like? Practicing oneness.
Well, they encourage us to look for similarities rather than differences, even with people that we might not initially like or understand.
So even if you're talking to someone with completely different opinions, you still try to find that common ground.
Exactly.
Right.
Remember, we all have these unique life stories and beliefs that have shaped who we are. And even if we can't agree with someone's viewpoint, we can still respect their right to hold those beliefs.
Okay.
It's about recognizing the human being behind the beliefs.
Like walk a mile in their shoes.
Exactly.
You may not agree with their path, but at least try to understand their journey.
I like that.
Yeah.
And along those same lines, the podcast also encourages us to be mindful of the language that we use when we're talking about others.
Okay.
Instead of using labels or making generalizations that create distance.
Try to use language that emphasizes our shared humanity.
Because words have power.
They do.
Right.
Yeah.
They could either build walls or they can build bridges.
Absolutely. And by being conscious of the words we choose, we can impact how we see ourselves and how we see others.
That's a good point.
Another tip the podcast offered was to make gratitude a regular part of your life.
Okay. Gratitude. Now, how does that fit in?
Well, think about it this way. When you're feeling grateful, you're naturally focused on the good things in your life.
Okay.
On all the abundance that surrounds you.
Right.
And that feeling of abundance can help to counter those feelings of scarcity or lack.
Which often leads to...
It often fuel fear and separation.
Okay, so instead of dwelling on what you don't have, gratitude helps you appreciate what you do have.
It's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
And then finally, the podcast also emphasized the importance of self-care, both physically and emotionally.
Now, see, a lot of people hear self-care and they think, like spotties.
I know, right.
Bubble baths, you know.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's actually a crucial part of cultivating love and unity.
Absolutely.
Okay.
When we neglect our own needs, we're more likely to feel drained, disconnected. And when we're running on empty, it's just so much harder to show up for others with love and compassion.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
Right.
If we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not going to have anything to give to anyone else.
That's such a good point because we often think of self-care as being selfish.
Right.
But it's actually an act of love.
It is.
Both for yourself and for the people around you.
Exactly. By taking care of our own well-being, we're actually strengthening our capacity to love and connect with the world around us.
This has been a really interesting conversation.
It has.
We've talked about love is unity, fear is separation, radical self-love, the illusion of separateness, and even forgiveness as like a key to connection.
For sure.
What stands out to you as the most impactful idea so far?
For me, it was that emphasis on forgiveness being essential for genuine connection.
Yeah.
When we're holding on to all those grudges and past hurts, it keeps us locked in that cycle of separation and pain.
It does.
And it prevents us from offering our true selves to others.
It's something I struggle with.
Yeah.
Personally, it's so easy to get caught up in those feelings of resentment or blame.
Right.
But ultimately, forgiveness is about letting go of that burden.
And choosing freedom.
Yeah.
It's not always easy, but it's a practice that can truly transform our relationships and our lives.
I think it's a great takeaway for everybody listening.
Yeah.
The podcast also had like these really tangible pieces of advice for bringing more love and unity into our everyday lives.
It did.
Looking for common ground, being mindful of our language, choosing gratitude, prioritizing self-care.
Those are actionable steps.
Yeah, they're not just like these fluffy ideas. It's like you can actually do something with this information.
I know, right?
And the more we practice these principles, the more we embody that energy of love and connection.
We do. We start to attract more of it into our lives.
Right. And isn't that what it's all about? Creating a world where love and unity win.
I think so.
Over fear and separation.
That's the goal.
This article and this podcast really do offer a hopeful message.
They do.
That we all have the power to create that kind of world, starting with ourselves.
It all starts with recognizing that interconnectedness and choosing to act from a place of love instead of fear.
Yeah, and that's a choice we can make.
Every single day.
Every single day.
Every interaction we have.
Like a ripple effect.
I love that.
The more we choose love, the more it spreads outward, impacting the people around us and creating a more loving, compassionate world.
Beautiful way to put it.
So you've given us a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
Where do we go from here?
What does this all mean for the listener, for you? Well, for the listener, maybe they're thinking, okay, this is all great, but how do I actually live this?
Yeah, how do we put this into practice?
Exactly. And the podcast actually offers some pretty concrete suggestions.
Oh,
one of them, one of the things they talk about is how we can move from this idea of separation to unity.
Okay.
And they suggest that even when you're dealing with someone that you disagree with, you should actively look for that common ground.
So even if you're butting heads with someone, instead of focusing on those differences, you try to find some area where you see eye to eye.
Yeah, or at least just understand where they're coming from.
Got it.
Remember, we all have these totally unique life stories and beliefs that have shaped who we are.
Right.
And even if we can't agree with someone's viewpoint, we can still respect their right to hold those beliefs. It's about recognizing the human being behind the beliefs.
It's like, you might not agree with their path, but you can at least try to understand their journey.
Totally.
A little empathy goes a long way.
It really does. And the podcast, they kind of build on that idea and talk about how important it is to be mindful of the language we use.
Oh, right.
When we're talking about others.
So the actual words that come out of our mouths?
The words we choose have so much power,
Absolutely.
And they can either build walls.
Right.
Or they can build bridges.
I like that.
So instead of using labels or making generalizations that kind of create that distance.
Right.
Try to use language that emphasizes our shared humanity.
It's all about connection.
Yeah, exactly.
So choosing your words carefully can really...
It can have a big impact.
Impact how we see ourselves and others.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Another practical tip they offer is to make gratitude a regular part of your life.
Gratitude. Now, how does that play into all of this?
Well, when you think about it,
when
you're feeling grateful, you're naturally focused on the good things in your life, right?
Yeah.
You're focused on all the abundance that surrounds you.
The things that you have to be thankful for.
Exactly. And that feeling of abundance that can help to counter those feelings of scarcity or lack.
Which often leads to that feeling of separation.
Yeah, that often fuel fear and separation.
Okay, so instead of dwelling on what we don't have, we're shifting our focus to what we do have.
It's a really powerful shift in perspective.
I could see that, yeah.
And then finally, the podcast really emphasizes the importance of self-care.
Self-care, now a lot of people hear that and think, like I said,
I know.
Spa days, bubble baths, facials, manicures.
All that good stuff.
But in this context, you're saying it's a really important part of cultivating love and unity.
Absolutely. Because when we neglect our own needs, we're much more likely to feel drained and disconnected.
Right.
And like we talked about before, when we're running on empty, it's so much harder to show up for others with that same love and compassion.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
Right.
We have to take care of ourselves.
That's a good one.
If we want to be able to give to others.
Yeah, and I think we often think of self-care as selfish, when it's actually an act of love for yourself and for others.
100%. By taking care of our own well-being, we're actually strengthening our capacity to love and connect with the world around us.
This has been, it's really given us a lot to think about.
It has.
We've talked about, love as unity, fear as separation, this idea of radical self-love,
right?
The illusion of separateness, and even forgiveness as a key to connection.
Such important concept.
Yeah, for sure. And then we went into all of this practical advice on how to actually bring more love and connection into our lives.
Right, like those tangible steps you're talking about.
Exactly. Actively looking for that common ground, being mindful of our language, choosing gratitude, prioritizing self-care. These are things we can actually do.
It's not just theory. It's like, here's what you can actually do.
And the more we practice those things, the more we kind of embody that energy of love and connection.
Absolutely. And the more we attract it into our lives.
Right. And isn't that what it's all about? Creating a world where love and unity kind of triumph over fear and separation.
I think that's the ultimate goal.
This article and this podcast that it talked about, they really do offer a hopeful message.
I think so.
That we all have the power to create that kind of world, starting with ourselves.
It all starts with that recognition that we're interconnected.
Yeah.
And then choosing to act from that place of love instead of fear.
Every day.
Every day, yeah.
In every interaction that we have.
It's like this ripple effect.
I love that analogy.
Yeah. The more we choose love, the more it spreads outwards.
It does, yeah.
Impacting the people around us and creating a more loving, compassionate world.
What a beautiful way to put it.
So, you've given us a lot to consider today. What resonates with you? What's really sticking with you?
You know, after all this, I've really started to see love in a different light.
Yeah, me too.
It's not just like this fleeting feeling. It's more like a way of being in the world, a way of being that's rooted in that unity and connection we were talking about.
It's like it made me question all those old ideas about love, you know? Like,
right.
The podcast really wants us to see it as this like fundamental part of who we are, not just something that like we experience sometimes.
I think that's a really good point. It's not something passive.
Right.
It's not something that just happens to us. It's something that
it's a choice.
We choose, every single day.
To connect, to forgive, to be inclusive, to show compassion.
And then compassion isn't just for others, it's for ourselves too.
Yeah, for sure.
What really resonated with you?
You know, I think it was that concept of love as unity and fear as separation.
Yeah.
It's so simple, but it's so powerful, you know?
It is. It really explains like why we feel disconnected sometimes.
Right. Or alone.
And I think that's what makes this whole conversation so interesting.
Yeah.
It's not just theoretical. It's like you can actually
use it.
Apply this stuff.
Yeah.
You can use it in your life.
And for me, that idea of radical self-love, that was big, like really embracing every part of ourselves.
Yeah.
Even the messy parts, even the
shadow side.
Yeah, the parts we don't like to talk about.
Right.
It's so important for creating real connection with other people.
It is, yeah.
It's about being whole so we can show up in our relationships.
I think that's a great takeaway for everyone listening.
Yeah. What about you? What are you still thinking about?
What I'm still thinking about.
Yeah, what questions came up for you?
I think for me, I keep thinking about the role of love in creating a more just world, you know? Like, if we really believe that separation is an illusion, how does that change how we interact with the world?
That's deep.
Right. How do we take these principles and actually make the world a better place?
It's not enough to just talk about it.
Right.
We have to live it.
Yeah, exactly.
So this has been great. We dove deep. We got a lot to think about.
We did.
Maybe folks should check out that podcast episode, you know?
That's a great idea, actually.
See what speaks to them.
See what resonates. See how it might change how they see love and connection, too.
Exactly.
Because ultimately, love is not just a feeling. It's something we create, something we share with the world.
And the more we choose love, the closer we get to that world of unity and connection.
A world without fear and separation.
That's the dream.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep choosing love.